Does it really? Because
I
I don't suffer particularly from trying to see both sides. I certainly don't suffer from false equivalence, but you see this one in really black and white terms. It is absurd for them to close a food bank, and it will have, or it would have, a very detrimental impact upon users, upon clientele.
The only thing I can think, the ones that have decided to close, it's probably the trustees that would have made that decision, who I don't want to sound harsh, but they're usually in a much more privileged position. And it's like, well...
It wasn't long ago, mate. I don't know if you were listening. We had some Tory councillors who were being photographed looking as happy as Larry at the opening of a food bank. They used it as a photo opportunity. So
of course they do. Yes. Of course they do. And I'm not going to get on my political high horse.
Can if you want.
But when this Tory government says they poured money into homelessness and addiction and whatever, they haven't. What they've done, they've targeted it at certain areas, which is important, but it's usually like to stop people losing their houses in the first place, which is important work.
Yes, of course.
But how does that address people who are actually street homeless at the moment and people with serious addiction issues?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. No. It doesn't do anything for it.
All the charity sector that relies almost entirely on volunteers.
James, everything that I've been involved with, both rehabs, the shelter that I was in last year, and now like being a volunteer and going this way, it's all charity. It's not government funded.
Yeah, and that's scary. And I mean, in one sense, I suppose it makes it easier to understand why some of them are going to be closing on days like Monday.
Yeah, maybe.
Because it is charity. But as you remind us, a lot of the people there will be, they do now have proper staff in place, which is quite chilling in a way to think that it's a paid job now working in a food bank because it's become so huge. The need for them has become so huge. You can no longer rely entirely on volunteers. Can I ask what you get out of it, Nicky, if that's all right with you?
I just feel like I'm giving something back, and that's the line of work I want to go into now.
I understand.
Before my addiction issues really hit, I was working for a corporate. I was regional manager.
Okay.
But as time's gone on, obviously I'm not in that situation now. It's sort of refocused my attention to what I want to do.
Wow.
So I want to work with homeless. I want to work with people with addiction issues, because I've been there, mate. That's what it is.
That's beautiful. Was there anyone who helped you in such a way that made you sort of think, crikey, that's what I want to do in the rest of my life? Or was it a collection of people and circumstances?
No. It was just because of the experiences I had and the support that I had all the way through. And I thought, these people are so dedicated, and as I said, they're not highly paid. The ones that are on payroll, they're not highly paid. A lot of volunteers, and they're so dedicated to what they're doing. And I thought, I've wasted 19 years of my life working for a corporate, making money for multimillionaires. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do something that's going to help someone like me, basically.
That's lovely. You know that old line, don't you, about the boss who says to his regional manager, let's say, for the purposes of this version of the joke, he parks his new Lamborghini outside the office. Like, hey, Nicky, come and have a look at my new Lamborghini. And he turns to you and he says, I'll tell you what, if you work really hard this year, I could get another one of these.
Do you know what? I'm not going to go into details because it would be totally inappropriate. Sure. That is not far from the truth of something that happened at my boss's mansion. Honest to God.
I can believe it. Thank you, Nicky, and good luck with it. Seriously, that's amazing to hear. And I can't fault your morals, really, is the word I'm looking for. Although I'm going to read a text from Tracy in Yorkshire, who makes a point. It's not a contradiction or even a contrast or a challenge to what Nicky has told us, but it is another point that needs to be borne in mind. She says, I find myself enraged that food bank providers are being critiqued for having the temerity to close on Monday. When did our perception shift so much that we see food banks as so ingrained in the fabric of our society that we can feel enraged when they aren't open? Most of them are run by the goodwill of volunteers and open at all different times. I'd also bet that many of them will be contacting users to arrange alternative provision. It's the idea that we now accept them so readily that angers me the most. I agree with you, and we touched on that with Nicky. We said that it is, tragic that they've become so necessary, so ingrained in the fabric of our society that they can no longer rely upon volunteers for their workforce. The job is too big, and it is a job that, again, we might realistically expect. Well, we might realistically expect to have a population that didn't need to use food banks on anything like the scale that they currently now exist. I think the most staggering statistic in this field, which is true, I've checked, there are now more food banks in this country than there are branches of McDonald's. And that was not true in 2010 when the first of 4 Conservative governments came into power. It's coming up to 11:45. A little more on this, if you would. What explains it? Let's move it on to the explanation of it. The whether it's the serious or the less serious decisions that have been taken. Why, given that the broad public opinion seems to be overreaction, why have these decisions been taken? And secondly, this is the bit I'd really like to hear at least 3 or 4 answers to before we hit the 12 noon news. Talk to me about why you think the mood in the country, and certainly on this programme, is more perturbed by overreaction than underreaction. I'm not going to let this go because it's one of my pet fascinations now. I find the kind of tyranny of poppy wearing and the ludicrous flag waving and people who are generally not very nice, pretending to be patriotic when really what they want to do is slag off foreigners. That's been so much a part of the fabric of public discourse in this country for the last 6 years, certainly. I'm fascinated to see the opposite of it unfolding now. In the context of the Queen's funeral, overreactions are getting, if you like, more attention than underreactions. I'd love to know why you think that is. Hopefully we'll have time to find out if you call 0345 60 973, because I also, after the next junction, want to speak to Philip O'Brien, one of the experts in the field, a professor of strategic studies, of course, at the University of St Andrews. We've spoken to him before about this absolutely fascinating situation and developments in Ukraine. It's 11:45. 11:48 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue our commitment to recognising the fact that we're in a period of profound historical significance and national sadness, but there are, of course, other important events unfolding at home and abroad, none more so, particularly in the context of abroad, than the remarkable gains made by Ukrainian forces in the course of the last few days. It was only really this weekend that the scale of the success began to emerge. We have, of course, been reminded earlier in the week that there is a very tragic and unpleasant postscript to these reports and these developments, given the war crimes that have occurred and evidence of which is likely to emerge as these territories previously held by Russian troops are abandoned and Ukrainian forces reoccupy them. Social media, often an unreliable gauge, not always, of course, but containing some amazing footage of soldiers liberating villages, in one case his own village, where his mother had been waiting for him, confident that he'd come back safe. Of course, you can't be fully confident that your family are going to come back safe when they go off to war, but given how quickly it has moved from a perception, a belief that it was a war of attrition, that it really was a case of essentially two stags with their antlers locked, and then no one really sure about what would transpire next, but an increasing fear on this side of the war that the West was going to lose interest or dilute support, and an insistence from Zelensky and other interested parties that they won't get anywhere without Western support. And then over the course of last weekend, huge changes. Philip O'Brien is a professor of strategic studies at the University of St Andrews and someone who's helped us get our head around developments in the past and will hopefully help us do so again. Let's begin with that shift, if we may, Philip. I hope it was accurate. Most people, perhaps not you, but most people were, if you like, bedded down in this notion of attrition, and then suddenly this weekend all bets were off.
Well, the attrition was real. It's
yes,
just
of course.
What's happening through the attrition. I mean, there's been a trend for the last 4 months, maybe since February 24th, and the long-term steady trend is Russia getting weaker, Ukraine getting stronger. That Russia went in with its best force, with its best equipment. They've lost a huge number of soldiers, some of their best soldiers, a huge amount of equipment, a lot of their best equipment. They're making it up with less good equipment. So the Russian army is materially weaker now than it was in February. Ukraine has certainly lost soldiers, but as a fighting force is much stronger now than it was in February. It's much better armed. Because people had counted the Ukrainians out too early, Ukraine was really poorly armed in February.
Right.
It didn't have what it should have had people been giving it a chance. Now, Ukraine is armed with much more advanced systems. Its soldiers are well trained, much better trained with the Russians, more motivated. So it didn't look like things were moving, but under the surface, they were really moving. And it's more that they just emerged now. So it wasn't sudden. It was where we were heading.
Like a blooming then, if you like, but the seed had germinated and the sprouts were under the ground for quite a long period before. And that gives momentum then. If that, perception of likely failure was informing attitudes of allies before, this absolute evidence of real success is going to see a sea change in attitudes from allies. Yeah,
there's been a lot of misunderstandings about the war and popular opinion of war. One of them is the silly notion that people get bored. Actually, for good or ill, they don't tend to get bored with war. They tend to be fascinated by war. Public support for a war, particularly in the United States, which I know about, but I would also argue in Europe, is partly dependent on whether they think it's winnable. That's a really important variable.
Right.
So they weren't going to go, oh, this is so boring, I'm going to go play video games. What they were going to say is, I will remain invested in this war if I think Ukraine can win it. And then I'll be willing to pay a price, have support given. The second I don't think Ukraine can win, well, then, I will go off and think about something else. So boredom was the wrong one. It's the perception of victory. And that's why this is so important. In fact, you see certain states now jumping more on the Ukraine bandwagon, trying to give aid than they were given 2 weeks ago, because now Ukraine looks like it's going to be successful, even though it was always going to be heading in this direction.
So the association becomes both, politically and emotionally beneficial.
Yep. I mean, now they can imagine Ukraine winning. They want Ukraine to win. So it's all about how they see the war going.
And talk a little, if you would, Phillips, about the opposite effect of that, the fact that, Russia, since the Second World War, has seen itself as a military superpower, not just the members of the military, but the whole population, the Kremlin. It's part of their mythology, it's part of their identity, and they are being humiliated now.
They absolutely. First of all, the Soviet Union saw itself.
Of course, yes, absolutely.
Of which Ukraine was. I mean, Russia is 60% of the Soviet Union, so it's lost a lot of its people and a lot of resources. But look, there was an analytical failure. There was, and in many ways, I think we're in a bit of an analytical crisis now. That to understand what actually makes a power, and too many people were obsessed with weapons. It was like, what weapons? Let me add up the weapons. And let me look at what they think they'll do with the weapons. And it's almost like playing war games to establish power. A military is the creation of a society. The society is far more important for the strength of a power than the tanks it has. And we lost sight of that. Russia is a corrupt, technologically deficient country. It was never going to produce the kind of military, sadly, that many analysts portrayed it as having.
Ah, I see. I would never have thought of it like that until you just explained it, because you think of the individual soldiers as being the gauge of an army's strength, but actually they're simply consequences of a system.
They are. An army is a product.
Yeah.
An army is something that is created from a society and a political structure. If you have a corrupt political structure, you're going to have a corrupt army.
So they might engage in all the pomp and ceremony and behave as if they are, the inheritors of the Red Army's mantle. But in fact, there's a brittleness at their core, which is born of the state. It's born of the regime.
Absolutely. I mean, there was corruption and thievery up and down the line because the state is based on corruption and thievery.
There it is. Gosh.
It's Mussolini's. It's the same way we viewed Mussolini's armies in the 30s. Everyone thought Mussolini had created a great military force, but it was blue smoke and mirrors.
So what happens next is too crass a question. How do you see the short term unfolding?
Short-term Ukraine is regrouping now.
Yeah.
I mean, they probably went faster than they were expecting. I mean, the collapse was quite strong. And if you notice, the collapse bloomed out. So the Ukrainian forces have got spread out over a much larger area than they started, which was more focused.
Yes.
So the Ukrainians are going to have to get their forces back together, rest them, re-equip them, and resupply them. However, anything that can be gotten to Ukraine now in the next few weeks is really valuable, because they certainly should have another push in them. That the Russians seem to be having trouble getting troops to go back into Ukraine. The Russian army is not in great shape morale-wise. We're not seeing any great... The Russian army has fought a very stupid war. It hasn't sort of shown any intellectual growth. So what Ukraine needs is any aid we can get it now to get its logistics up, to make sure it's sort of well supplied, and make sure that when the next push comes, and it will come, they're in the best shape possible. Because if Russia doesn't get more troops, this can happen again. Russia simply is trying to protect far too large an area with far too few soldiers.
And that, I mean, it's not an army you'd want to sign up for. I know they won't have much choice in whether they sign up for it or not, but that brittleness that we talked about can only really get worse in the context of what's now unfolding.
Well, I don't think anyone rationally would want to stay in that army right now.
No.
If you've seen what has happened, I mean, they're suffering, by the way, hugely in Kherson, where the Ukrainians drew them in. Ukrainians sort of tempted them into Kherson, and right now they're just pounding away at the Russians in Kherson. So that army is going to be in a lot of trouble, but they're trying to rebuild a line in the east where they weren't, with very few troops. So I think Ukraine, this could happen again if Ukraine is allowed to prepare and help. I mean, it did take them months to get to the point where they launched this.
Right, I see.
So it's not something that happens overnight, but it can happen again. And
finally then, and I mean, I ask it because Volodymyr Zelensky has mentioned it, and some of the coverage, some of the analysis has now mooted it. The notion of retaking or liberating Crimea comes into play.
Well, I mean, if the Russian army is destroyed, there's going to have to be a new Russian army. I mean, if Russia is going to fight through next year in any way, they're going to have to mobilize. They with what they have now, they can't fight through next year.
Wow.
It's hard to say. I mean, using Ukrainian estimates, and actually people first the Ukrainians are overestimating. My guess is the Ukrainian estimates of Russian dead are pretty accurate.
Okay.
And the Russians have lost as many soldiers so far as the U.S. lost in the entire Vietnam War.
And it will probably pose similar political problems at home, even with the ludicrous Russian media. Eventually, those sort of lessons get learned, don't they?
Well, I mean, the Russian people have to be saying, is this war winnable?
Yeah.
Again,
it's the converse of what you... Yeah, exactly that.
And if the Russian people are going, well, here we are 6 months in, and we were told this was going to be a cakewalk, and now we're being told we're regrouping in Kharkiv, then the Russian people start... Now, again, how do they express public opinion? I'm not a Russianist. I don't want to claim to be a Russianist or a Putin expert. I'm usually wrong on Putin, by the way. If you want to see where I'm consistently wrong, it's what Putin will do. But it's got to be a very difficult war now politically, even in a dictatorial state.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Phillips O'Brien, once again for shining so much light on these otherwise complicated questions. Phillips O'Brien, the Professor of Strategic Studies at the University of St Andrews, and actually, I don't know if you can hear me now, but one of my favourite experts on this issue, because he doesn't just provide clarity and illumination about what's going on, he brings in things that you didn't actually appreciate were going on, the sort of, if you like, the below the surface movements, and they're the ones that often give you a better understanding of what's happening above the surface. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the time is approaching 12 noon. A change of pace next. I think it worked rather well yesterday. Life begins at 40, but work stress peaks at 45. It is the psychological phenomenon known as the midlife crisis. There's a final judgment on whether it's real or not real. It is 4 minutes after 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'll let Kate kick things off. She says the midlife crisis is used in some instances as an excuse for unacceptable or bad behaviour. An example might be a spouse or partner having an affair and the blame being placed on a midlife crisis rather than on the partner responsible. It's easier to blame the intangible. However, I do believe that stress in the workplace is very real at 45. And beautifully, Kate there gives us the sort of twin parts of the conversation that we're going to have now. It's been published by the National Bureau of Economic Research. It is called The Midlife Crisis, and its authors said that they were unable to explain why there should be an apparent decline in psychological or emotional health for people in their 40s and 50s as a consequence, and this is the bit where I'm going to have to be very sensitive in trying to invite you to contribute to the programme, because it is a consequence of being disappointed with one's lot, of feeling unfulfilled. That appears to be the most likely culprit. So I suspect, I mean, this is footballification gone mad, isn't it? Because 45 is half time. So in a football game, not in life, I don't know what the average life expectancy is, but I don't think it's reached 90 yet, unless the richer you are, the longer you live. But that, I've always thought, has got to be part of it. You reach half time and you weigh up your life and you think to yourself, well, I was expecting a little bit more from life, perhaps, not necessarily materially. Maybe the children are growing up and you haven't filled that hole in your heart yet that's been left by the amount of attention and care that you had to lavish on them. Maybe your marriage or your partnership, your main relationship, has either ended or become a bit moribund, become a bit stale, or even unhappy, even unpleasant, even undesirable. I don't know. That's why I have to be careful trying to tempt you to ring in, because I'm going to sound horribly smug on almost all of these measures, and I think we've all had quite enough of that over the years. Late 40s, early 50s are routinely described as the toughest times yet for people because of a range of serious psychological and social issues. Theoretically, people should be at their most comfortable, but actually, it's the age at which people feel overwhelmed in the workplace. The maximum level of work stress is reached at approximately the age of 45. So I have two questions for you. The first is, well, I want a little bit more than is the midlife crisis real, but I think you have a thing, don't you, where if I say, is the midlife crisis real, you can only really answer that question yes, because I've had one. So that's really what I'm looking for. What happened I bought a turquoise bicycle. That was my midlife crisis. Other men buy Porsches or have affairs. I spent more money on a bicycle than I ever would have thought I'd be able to spend on a bicycle. But compared to, middle-aged men in Lycra, it was a pittance. It didn't cost anything like the kind of money that friends of mine who disappear for hours on end at the weekend, which is also a midlife crisis. Why do so many of men's midlife crises involve cycling, do you think? That's question number 3. I'm putting that on the God, it just keeps on coming today, Keith, doesn't it? Seriously. That might just be my world, but there's something happens. Men reach a certain age. It must be some attempt to regain physical, I don't know. Why do so many middle-aged men in Lycra is a thing, right? Mammal. You call it a mammal. So it's not just my circle that this has happened in. It's an actual thing. If you were married to a middle-aged man, you'd much rather, I imagine, that his midlife crisis involves spending £1,000 on a bicycle and riding it to Milton Keynes and back every Sunday afternoon than if he were to run away with a colleague or Dirty Gertie from number 30. We don't want any of that going on, surely. So maybe we need to be a bit kinder to mammals. But no, that's a bit... Don't answer that one yet. Don't ring in about that one yet, okay? Because I want to do the slightly more obvious elements of the conversation first, and then we'll do the why cycling. So question number 1. Is a midlife crisis real, or is it just an excuse for bad behaviour? 0345 6060 973. Then we can see both sides of the coin. I've got some sympathy for Kate. I think men are much luckier in the age stakes than women are. Men don't generally become invisible at the sort of 45 to 50 mark. Men don't generally see their careers begin to tail off. In my industry, you're going to find men in their 70s and 80s. You're very rarely going to find women in their 70s and 80s still knocking it out of the park. I don't understand why. I think it's wrong. I think it's unfair, but it is also actually happening. So maybe the fact that men feel they've got a longer innings ahead of them when they reach middle age means that they then start trying to recapture youth, most obviously perhaps through sex or trying to look younger, dyeing their hair, having a hair transplant, whatever it may be. I don't know. I sometimes think my absolute lack of vanity is a disaster. I should be trying to dye my hair or have a hair transplant. There's a piece in the Times at the weekend about a new toupee that they glue on your head. I mean, it looks absolutely incredible. But I'd start laughing every time I walked past a mirror, which is tempting anyway. I don't know. For me, that is evidence of a midlife crisis. But if you lost your hair in your 20s and you sought technological help, that wouldn't be a midlife crisis. That would just be a trichological crisis, wouldn't it? Anyway, I'm digressing slightly. Is there such a thing as a midlife crisis, or is it just an excuse used largely by men to justify their Boris Johnson tribute acts when it comes to their love lives? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And then the second question is, why would work get more stressful in this period? Why do you think work? Why for you? It has to be for you. Why would work become more stressful in the 45 to 50 sort of period, mid 40s, early 50s? It should be a period of sort of consolidation and of, not a celebration necessarily, but of completion. Peak wages might be part of it. If you're in an industrialized society, you earn more at the midpoint of your lives than ever before. Peak wages in the late 40s for lower educated workers, early 50s for higher educated workers. You suffer from relatively few health issues compared to what is going to happen on the horizon. But, to quote this report, something elemental appears to be going wrong in the middle of many of our citizens' lives. I'd love to know what you think it is. Why, when essentially things are going better than they've ever gone before, are so many people reporting mental and psychological stress on a scale that they've never seen before? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And then on the less serious, well, it's not unserious, is it, if it's caused the breakdown of your marriage, but in the traditional perception of the midlife crisis, the man who goes out and buys a sports car, or who starts I don't know, primping up his hair and using products he's never used before. Is that real? I think it's real, but my evidence is largely on it. I'm just trying to think if any of my mates have had. Most of my mates are bald. Have any of my mates had a midlife crisis? Only in the context of cycling, which introduces the third element of this conversation. Why would, and this is entirely my own, so it might not work at all, but why do so many middle-aged men take up sort of semi-competitive cycling? Not the kind of cycling I do, with a basket on the front of my bicycle and just tootling around the place like a sort of like Mr. Beebe in that E.M. Forster novel. Why do they become sort of, Olympic tribute acts in the skin-tight lycra and the expensive bod? Is it about bicycles that answers the questions posed by so many middle-aged men's midlife crises? So there's something for everybody there, isn't there? I mean, honestly, seriously, you've got the silly side of it, or at least the relationship side of it. You've got the serious side of it, the psychological phenomenon that has inspired films, books, newspaper columns. 1965, the term midlife crisis was first coined, and it usually refers to fathers trading in the family hatchback for a convertible, or having flings with people decades their junior. If that's happened to you, is it just a cop-out, a con, a nice bit of camouflage used to describe men who have the same sort of control over themselves that Boris Johnson has displayed for his entire life? But why would it happen now and not sooner? 0345 6060 973. And then why? The serious element of this. Life satisfaction was lowest at the age of 45. The good news is that means it gets better again. The bad news is that for many people listening to this programme, which inexplicably appeals ever more so to younger listeners, the bad news is you've got all this on the horizon, folks. So why? Why would 45 be the age at which people regularly and mostly report their life satisfaction is at the lowest? I love the idea of being such a cocky phone-in host that I'm now confining a large part of this phone-in to people who are now 45. But obviously you can look back on being 45. I don't think you can look forward. So you are going to be interested, I'm going to be interested in what you think about older people claiming that they're having a midlife crisis. But for the rest of us, it's 5 years behind me? I didn't have a midlife crisis. Well, maybe no one realises they're having a midlife crisis, but I didn't have a midlife crisis. As far as I'm aware, I didn't make any major changes in pursuit of what you might loosely describe as youth. I discovered therapy about that time, and that's improved my life in every measurable way, but it would have done so if I'd discovered it at 25 or 35. Better late than never. But that age right there is the one at which most people report their life satisfaction is at its lowest, which is actually really sad, isn't it? Because in many ways, the measures by which we judge ourselves are never going to get better than they do around the 45 mark. You're probably peaking in earnings. You might be peaking in sort of physical fitness. I don't mean it's the best it's ever been, but I mean your knees haven't started hurting yet, and you don't count the pains and the aches and the sprains when you get out of bed every morning. So why 45? 0345 6060 973. And is there such a thing as a midlife crisis when it comes to behaviour rather than feelings? Two very different questions. You're welcome to answer one or both, but don't ring in to answer neither. Hello, 18 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Should we catch up with Theo, do you think? Make sure he's all right. He hasn't been attacked by a crowd of queuers. Theo, keeping a close eye on that queue in which people waiting to pay their respects to the Queen, who will be able to do so from 5 p.m. today. Catch up with him after 12:30, I think. Before that, midlife crisis, is it real? That's the slightly light-hearted approach to it, although I do appreciate that if you're husband ran off with your friend, your younger friend, then it's not exactly light-hearted. But on a more serious note, why is 45 the age at which people routinely report feeling least satisfied with their life? David's in Watford. David, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello.
Hello, David. You can't sound surprised to get on. You've rung in, you've spoken to a producer, you've been put on hold, and you've been told that you're being put through to the programme. Then you sound surprised. Oh, you're just surprised I didn't waffle on for 20 minutes, aren't you, before introducing your call?
Well, your words, not mine.
What would you like to say?
But, you're right on several counts. You basically you've answered your own question, and you've put your finger on basically everything that happens between those ages. So mid-40s to mid-50s. They all come together at once, and they are all happening at once, and that's what the crisis actually is. So I was saying to your researcher, you said you're likely to be earning more than you've ever earned before.
Yes.
That's actually the case. You are likely to earn more, not just more than you ever have before, but more than you ever will. But you're not done yet.
Of course. You can see the other side of the hill because you're on the top of it.
Precisely.
Yeah, right.
And it happens at the worst possible time, because at that time in your life, if you're earning, let's say you're right about the earnings thing, and you are, it's also probably the peak of your responsibilities.
Okay.
So you may be in a senior role at work, you may have a team reporting to you. A lot of people are relying on you. If you are married in that infamous nuclear family you were talking about earlier on, with you on that.
Yeah.
But if you're in one, your children will be at a critical age. They're likely to be in university, going into their first jobs. A lot of people are relying on you, but you're looking at it, you're thinking, right, where's the next gear? Where do I go from here? And there is a serious lack of help and support in helping you to do that because of your age. And another thing you mentioned, you said, surely you don't just become invisible. Yes, you do.
How do you mean? Well, I was talking about men compared to women, so you can't. I mean, it's harder for women, but how do you become invisible as a man? And we're thinking about when they're looking around the office wondering who to promote to the next level, the level you're probably now never going to reach. They're going to go for someone who's 10 years younger than you.
Yes, absolutely that, in fact. Yeah. Because, and I did mention this to your researcher, so you're in that mid-40s to mid-50s thing.
Yeah.
You're in charge of a team. You're bringing up some young talent, very probably. There are people younger than you. You're passing on some of your skills. And what happens is they have now reached their sort of early to mid-30s.
Yeah.
They are at their most potent career-wise, and their most demanding career-wise, and their most aspirational career-wise, and they are draining that from you.
And they're snapping at your heels as well all the time.
Exactly. Yeah. So you are now under pressure. How do I get out of the way, or how do I make progress? But I'm not visible to the workforce, so how do I make that progress so I can get out of their way? So you have all that happening at work. So that's the reason for the work problem and the lack of...
Of course it is.
And let's not forget, life is mostly work. So the numbers support that. You know the numbers. Life is mostly work.
As in hours spent every day, it is, of course.
Right, and everything else. So if you're not satisfied at work, you're not satisfied in life.
Oof. But, I mean, live to work, work to live, they're just words. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to pursue, and if you can pull it off, then fair play to you and good luck in trying to. But you're right, for most people, it is, you're rarely going to... It was a bit similar to the conversation we had yesterday about quiet quitting, actually, but most people are going to set huge amounts of store by their work status or their work success in context of how they see themselves. What, if you don't mind me asking, are you drawing on here? Are you drawing on personal experience or psychological expertise, academic insights, or none or all of the above?
All of the above.
Okay. And how old are you now?
I'm 59 now.
Oh, okay.
25 years in the people profession.
Right. PR, HR.
Sorry?
HR sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And operations management in a range of different types of businesses where I've looked across the piece at who's making progress and how do we use it and what do we do and how do we help and all of those things. And this is a really big deal. And actually, you know, I'm a recent returnee to listening to LBC. Congratulations, It was you that did it.
Thank you very much. You're very welcome.
This links to so many more serious topics.
Yes, I'm
I mean,
sure.
you yourself said you're going to treat this fairly lightheartedly.
Half of it, not the second bit. I'm not treating the second bit lightheartedly. If people are miserable and it's measurable, that's deadly serious, literally.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. If you look now at employment figures, I mean, I'm not going to be flippant about this because it is deadly serious, and I've known about it for some years. Is you need the economy to rebound from its various traumas. Yeah. How is that going to happen? Well, it can't happen unless everybody is involved. And you talked about quiet quitting. Yeah. Other people mentioned the big resignation. All of those things, they're all real. And if people are not working or going back to work or separating themselves from the idea of work, that has an economic impact.
It does.
Directly.
No, you're absolutely right. And it explains some of the numbers that we were looking at yesterday. Although long-term illness was the biggest factor, people reaching a sort of, why do I still do this every day kind of attitude is going to be very pertinent and impactful as well. Is that? I've got loads of people waiting. I just want to ask you one more question, if I may, David. Yep. Is there a hump? Can you remember a hump where you actually thought, oh, that's it now. The next big job that comes up is going to go to someone younger than me? Because it happens for the first time in your life. They've just put Tom Swarbrick on Drive Time here at LBC, which is the first time that they've hired a presenter on the daytime schedule here who's younger than me. I hadn't actually noticed that before. Maybe I should be having a crisis. But is there a moment when you realise that?
Yeah, I was 51.
Yeah.
I was 51. I saw it happen and I thought, okay, that's it. So now we're going to do something else.
Oh, good for you.
And, we're negotiating, we're sort of navigating our way down the hill, and at the bottom of the hill is the door, and we're out the door. And yes, that's what happened. Change your priorities, have a bit of a think, and recognise what is likely and what is not likely to happen. David, thank you. What a perfect opener. Loads of food for thought there. Sally's in Catford. Sally, what would you like to say?
Oh, I'll take you off. Hi, James.
Hello, Sally.
I didn't hear all of that. It sounded really interesting, so I'll have to listen to it on catch-up. But my point is probably a bit more kind of philosophical. I think that's the right word. I might have used the wrong word. Sorry. Anyway, what I wanted to say was I'm mid-50s, so I'm kind of reflecting. And I think a lot of people in my kind of cohort got to kind of mid-40s and wanted to... It's kind of halfway point, you hope, probably, in your kind of active life. So I think...
So you think that the clock or the calendar says to you, you better have a bit of a think, you better have a bit of a look at yourself now, because it's half-time oranges time.
Well, kind of.
Yes,
yeah,
I buy that. I do buy that.
And so I think some people make poor choices. They run off and
just
have
affairs. Tell me about you. What did you do?
I had being really honest, yes. I was an alcoholic. I had a drink problem.
Gosh.
I was actually an alcoholic, but I didn't realise it at the time.
Yes.
I just thought I had a significant drink problem. And I was lucky enough to, and I was open enough at that point in my life to go to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've been sober ever since.
Congratulations, and keep it
a
up.
lot to say on the national radio, actually.
Well, it is a lot to say, but I mean, I didn't ambush you. You did ring in.
No, I did. You're absolutely right, and I think I did that because I guess I did it because I want people to know that if you're struggling with your drinking problem, there is a solution.
And it's never too late, Sally.
No.
That's the point, isn't it? Because for me with therapy, as I mentioned earlier, the idea that, I wish I'd done this much sooner because my life has improved so much. But you can't think like that. You have to think, well, it's great that you've done it now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wish I'd done it years before.
Of course.
But I'm just so grateful that I've got it now. It's without doubt the best thing I've ever done in my life.
Oh, wonderful. Well done, and keep it up, if whatever the appropriate thing is to say. But that's great to hear. 28 minutes after 12. Thank you, Sally. He said another one. There is a wonderful Twitter account. I have to tell you, just going back to the conversations that we were having in the first hour, 2 hours essentially of the program. I'm not going to be able to find it now. I want you to get absolutely the right Twitter address, so I'll share it with you in a moment. But a Twitter account is tracking all indeed of the overreactions, if you like, to the unfolding period of mourning. I just want to make sure I get absolutely the right. Grieve Watch, they're called. They're spelled as you'd expect, GRIEVEWATCH. I'm a huge admirer of people that contribute to the jollity of the nation and the common good for no particular personal gain except the satisfaction of knowing that you're bringing joy into people's lives, and you have very much, whoever runs the Grieve Watch Twitter account has been doing that for me, also providing me with lots of content on the radio as well. I wouldn't have known about some of these stories if it wasn't for you, although Keith has brought this one to my attention, and it's a blue ticked account, so there's no need to check. All of our UK restaurants will be closed on Monday until 5 p.m. to allow everyone at McDonald's to pay their respects to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Operating hours and services may vary after 5 p.m, so please check our app before travelling, which reminds me of a tweet I got, or a message I got at the top of the show from a pal of mine who runs a pub. A lot of his colleagues are now fretting about whether they should open their pubs on Monday or not, feeling a bit bad about staying open, quite a few places shutting in the area. And this little message has come up. Pubs have a special, unique place in the community. I'm sure she would expect pubs to be open for the country during the time of need. This is what my friend, the landlord, wrote. Is that not what we are here for? Most of us are not shops or lock-up jobs. We worry when we can't get customers, but then shut when customers want to come in. And he adds, remember the Blitz. To which I would add, all of the people who would do performative anger about pubs closing were the same people who thought that the pubs shouldn't have shut at the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak. So if you get any jip for shutting your pub, just say something stupid like, well, they didn't shut the pubs during the Blitz, and you'll be golden. It's 12:30. Holly Harris is here with your headlines. You're not going to believe this, but Centre Parcs have made it worse. Seriously, I have to say thank you to whichever listener it was, Siobhan, for bringing this to my attention. Siobhan, I would have completely missed this if it wasn't for you. It's just dropped in the last half an hour. Thinking about it, we should have worked this out ourselves. But Centre Parcs, I've told people they don't actually have to leave on the night of Monday, the 19th, but everything's going to be shut anyway. So all of the attractions, the village as it were, is actually going to be closed. It's already been picked up by some media outlets. Holiday company Centre Parcs, writes My London, have been heavily criticised when they told customers they were booting them off the sites on Monday out of respect to the Queen. They initially told people they can remain. We now learn they must stay inside their lodge. Inside their lodge? I mean, you presumably are not going to get into trouble if you step outside for a breath of fresh air. But Centre Parcs, and I've been to one, they are essentially in forests. And forests are nice, but the attraction is not the forest. The attraction is the water slides and the restaurant and the bike ride. So none of it's going to be there. They've made it worse. They're not even reverting to normal service, and they're still telling people, as far as I can tell, who are booked in to arrive on Monday, not to come until Tuesday. I mean, someone wrote, I haven't just seen a tweet saying that Centre Parcs are going to kick a family with 2 small babies out of their park on Monday the 19th. As a mum with a 3-month-old baby, I'm absolutely traumatised. I know it's a historical moment, but surely you can do something else. To which Centre Parcs replied, We recognise leaving the village for one night is an inconvenience. We have listened and made the decision to allow guests to remain on village on Monday. However, the village will still be closed, so guests will need to remain in their lodges. Somebody has pointed out that this is essentially a hostage situation, or indeed house arrest, to which the poor person charged with running the Centre Parcs social media account today has had to reply, "Apologies for my wording," and the wording there was, "You will need to remain in your lodges," to which one tweeter replied, "People without the right to leave a building is called jail." And she's now replied, "Apologies for my wording, you will be allowed to walk around the village, but the facilities will be closed." Wow. What's going to happen next? Seriously. We should almost have had a sound effect ready for Centre Parcs Watch. 12:36 is the time. Luckily, Theo Usherwood is on Q Watch today. Theo, what's going on?
I'm still here. We have some numbers,
Could be worse,
James,
mate. You could be at Centre
government.
Parcs. Go on.
It could be. Right. There are going to be 1,000 marshals manning this queue, which is stretching for 6.9 miles, I'm told, all the way back to Southwark Park in Bermondsey. And there's an additional 3 miles of, if you like, zigzags within Southwark Park for those who still might want to join the back of the queue, even if it were to stretch 10 miles long. We are going to get, James, live updates on boards along the queue at various points to tell you exactly how much longer you have until you get to the front of the queue. So if you're worried about, because you were asking me exactly, if you were to join the back of the queue now, how long would it take for me to get to the front? There will be people on hand to tell you at the back of the queue how long your wait will be. I should say, however, that this queue is getting longer by the minute. It now stretches all the way back past Royal Festival Hall, almost to Blackfriars Bridge. That's about a mile long. We've also got 40 scouts who are on hand to offer support.
How many?
10 staff from the Red Cross. 40.
40?
40
scouts? But you just...
600...
you just told how many people are we expecting in this queue?
Possibly around 750,000. We have...
there's 40 scouts. I mean, I'm a big fan of the scouts. Dib, dib, dib. What are they going to do?
Well, we've got more than 500 portaloos.
Okay.
We have first aid tents. We have 600 first aiders from St John's Ambulance, 140 Red Cross volunteers.
Doesn't sound
and
like
we also have 30 multi-faith pastors, and those people are being asked, James, anybody working on this mammoth project are being asked if they spot anybody in distress, spot anybody who's struggling to cope, then they're being asked to take them out of the queue and to put them in the priority access.
Good.
To go through the Westminster Hall to sing the Lying in State, which will start at about 5 o'clock. You are being told, though, to be very careful with the amount of stuff you bring, because you will be going through airport-style security in Victoria Palace Gardens just before you enter the Palace of Westminster.
You can't do that with a fold-up chair. You can't do that with a fold-up chair, can you?
No. You can bring small bags with you in. If you're going into the Westminster Hall, your mobile phone needs to be switched off. It needs to stay in your pocket. No filming, no photography under any circumstances whatsoever.
Well, that could get messy, couldn't it? Policing that, because some people need to take photographs in the most inappropriate of circumstances.
But the government are actively encouraging people to make this journey, to come down here and to pay their respects, their last respects to Queen Elizabeth II. And of course, all of this is only going to start once Queen Elizabeth II's coffin has left Buckingham Palace at 2:22. That coffin is going to be followed by King Charles III, Prince William and Prince Harry walking on foot down the Mall, down Horse Guards Road. It's then a left-hand turn onto Horse Guards Parade, through the gates, and then onto Whitehall, down to, in solemn procession, down Whitehall to Parliament Square, and then into Westminster Hall, which of course is the oldest part of the building within the Palace of Westminster, where there will be a short service. Actually. Yeah, it is stunning, led by the Archbishop of Canterbury. And I've just been on Whitehall. There are crowds 4-5 deep who are standing there waiting for that procession to start for a last glimpse, if they can't make it into Westminster Hall, of course, to see the Queen's coffin make that. Well, it won't be our final journey because, of course, the service itself, state funeral itself, is going to be in Westminster Abbey before she is laid to rest in St George's Chapel in Windsor.
Yes, indeed. Of those 6.9 miles maximum length, how long do we reckon it is at the moment? Do we have a view on that, Theo Ashford?
I think it's more than a mile long. It actually could go up to 10 miles in maximum length before they start. Yes,
but there's a coil on the end of it, isn't there, in the park, as it were, a sort of spiral, a bit like you get at Alton Towers and places like that.
Yes.
Where the queues go, and airports, where they go alongside each other. 40 scouts, you say, Theo. How many journalists, roughly, would you say were in attendance today?
I would say, looking down this particular stretch of the River Thames, South Africa River Thames, I would say I could spot well more than 100 journalists from all over the world. They come from journalists from
Don't just list countries
Denmark.
now. Okay, carry on.
No, I've seen their mic muffs where they have their networks on them, James. I wouldn't just randomly list countries and try and provide an accurate report about how the international media attention is focused on London.
America perhaps?
Yes, I think there have been several from America.
France?
Yes, I've seen the London correspondents of France 24,
there it is.
Only 50 yards away from me.
That's Germany?
Haven't seen Germany yet. But
Why not?
Okay, James, I'll get back on it.
It's 12:42. Theo Ashford and 40 scouts. If you are going to head down there, we will be keeping a close eye on proceedings. I mean, it still sounds... the maximum wait we were reading at one point could be 30 hours. Be careful. That's all I'm worried about. If you're up for it, then fantastic. It could be a truly memorable moment that you will remember for the rest of your life. But be aware what you're signing up for. And that's why I'm keeping a very close eye on how long that queue actually is. It's enough to give you a midlife crisis, worrying about your listeners when you do a job like this. Speaking of which, Susie's in Sedbergh. Susie, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
Hiya. I think that 45, the age of 45, is to do with where we are in relation to our parents and to our children. So we might have, if we're lucky enough to have our parents still with us, they might be quite elderly, getting towards, the winter of their lives. We might have children who are all but grown up, settling down perhaps. And for me, I really clearly remember my parents being the age that I'm at now. I remember my mum and dad turning 40. I remember organising their 50th birthday parties. And then when I look at my children, I was engaged at their age. And so it kind of it instills a bit of panic in me because it's like holding up a mirror. In one direction, it projects the future in my parents, and then in the other direction, it reflects the past.
It's the Grim Reaper tapping you on the shoulder as well, isn't it? That's what we're talking about. It's a reminder of your own mortality. That's the thing that's going on.
It is. It's staring you in the face, and I think your parents start to kind of soften as well a little bit, and they start they start like being really kind of family orientated, because their career is suddenly not their focus, and it kind of puts the pressure on you in a sense, because you're wanting your parents to see you settled and see you successful. And if actually that's not what you are, what do you do? Like that you're running out of time.
And that's why that's why it gets better then. So 45 is like a moment, and it gets better afterwards. It was better before, but it's important to remember it gets better afterwards, which is where the parents' changes come in, because you sort of you become accustomed to what's going on. You reprioritise, you recalibrate. You're no longer, as David, the first caller, suggested, you don't sit there resenting and still competing with the younger colleagues who are now going to be preferred over you for the next big promotion. You redraw your priorities, you recalibrate your life, and you rediscover levels of happiness that you thought had been lost forever. Perhaps.
But you can only do that if you're in a kind of a place in your career where you can sort of recalibrate. What if you're in a career that is really not where you wanted to be? What if you've prioritised your children and now they're settled? You suddenly don't have, unless you've got a really kind of beautiful job that's fulfilling you and contributing to society. If you're not that person, then there is a panic of I'm running out of career time, and if I don't change now, then perhaps I never will.
Yeah, well, blimey, the clock is ticking. Time waits for no... Susie, that's lovely stuff. And how much of it, on a scale of 1 to 10, was drawn from personal experience?
Oh, probably about 8.
That'll do.
8.5. I mean, I took up the accordion. I got divorced and I changed careers.
You took up the accordion?
Yeah.
Have you got it handy?
Not handy.
Oh, come on. You can't do that.
Next time.
If I take a break now, will you give us a quick tune when we come back?
Oh, God.
You can't... you make me sound like the bad guy. You can't say on the radio I took up the accordion and then expect it just to pass by unnoticed.
I'm not very good. That's the problem.
You're not going to get better if you don't practice, and that's what I'm encouraging you to do. Will you? You don't say yes or no now, because you don't have to do it.
Oh, God. No. Yes, go on then, yeah.
Right, fantastic. And live on LBC, Susie and her accordion after this. 12:50 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're discussing the psychological phenomenon of midlife crises. Some people have affairs with much younger partners. Some people perhaps buy Porsches. There was one wonderful message which I lost about a fella who undertook all sorts of life changes. 5 years later, regretted it all and emigrated to avoid all the embarrassment. I wish I could find that now. But in the case of Susie and Sebba, she decided to take up the accordion. Susie, are you ready?
I'm ready, but you have to understand.
Yeah.
I've been, it's been like 6 months. I'm not very good.
That's all right. You're better than me.
And I've got my. Okay, right. Okay. Just to see if I'll just play one tiny bit and see if you can recognise it. Okay, ready?
Yeah.
I've lost it.
When skies are grey.
You can hear me.
You'll never know, dear, how much I love you.
Excellent.
My mum used to sing me that when I was a baby. I can't believe you chose that. I've gone all teary now.
Oh.
You'll
I'll
never
sing it to my children.
It's a beautiful song. My sunshine.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Keep it up. I mean, I'm not going to lie, Susie. It needs a bit of work.
I know.
As midlife crises go, that's currently my favourite.
Thank you.
Look after yourself. Thank you, Susie. Oh, what a lovely song. If you're not familiar with it, it's an absolute beauty. Ben, if you know, Keith just said in my eyes, if you're not familiar with it, it's nothing like what you just heard. Referring to my singing there, possibly both. Ben's in Devisers. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
big
Ben.
fan.
Thank you, mate.
Listen to Full Disclosure. Listen to you every day.
Top man.
Read
Thank you.
the books.
Oh, gosh, blimey.
Wear the T-shirt.
Got the lunchbox.
James, I'm 45. Most of my peers are 45, 46.
Yeah.
And I've noticed over the last few years that they've all been suffering, myself as well, with anxiety, depression, not sleeping, blah, blah, blah. And I see a link, and the link I've come up with is a drop in testosterone.
Oh, really?
Because we're very aware that women go through a change when they go through menopause, and it's all hormones. And I have a few friends, and they were really struggling with anxiety and depression, and they went to the doctor, doing their own research, but they went to the doctor eventually to get a testosterone test.
Yeah.
And they all came back with very low testosterone. And since they've been on some sort of replacement therapy, it's turned their lives around. They're able to sleep, their anxiety's gone down, it's turned their life around. A lot of guys were, I'm not going to mention individuals, obviously,
no, of course
but
not.
a lot of these guys were on the brink of suicide.
Oh, dear.
And I've noticed it in, I'd say a dozen or so friends I've got are really struggling and have been struggling over the last few years. And I could be completely barking.
No, of course you could. And I just need to stress that this is going to see the doctor about it. And if you need testosterone replacement therapy, you'll get a blood test and what have you. Right. The sort of supplements you might be able to buy in shops are generally not proven to make much difference to anything.
My understanding, because I used to be a PT a few years ago. My understanding is oral
go to the doctor.
Stuff doesn't quite hit the mark.
No,
and they have to get your levels right. But I was listening just a few weeks ago with some other friends of mine again who were sort of in their mid-late 40s, and I said I personally want to get myself a testosterone check earlier in the year, but again, anxiety always stops me doing things personally, even though I know.
What's the worst that can you find out your testosterone levels are a bit low?
But it's going out and going to somewhere new and having to sit down with someone I don't know and getting a blood test and where do I park and what is this in this room? Anxiety is a strange one to sort of pin down and explain.
Of course it is. Of course, and I'll tell you what, you're probably onto something, because the idea that it is what we're describing is measurable but not remotely chemical would be at odds with almost everything else we know, isn't it? I'm conscious of not wanting women listening to think we're trying to nick the menopause or anything like that. I appreciate that.
Of course not. And it drops off with every decade. But it's just I've noticed, because I am 45. I have noticed that all my friends are struggling with anxiety. They don't recover so well from injury. A lot of us do sports or extreme sort of sports. They don't recover well. They're not sleeping. As previous callers have said, they've got to a point in their career where they don't know where to go. They don't know whether to go forward, backwards, sideways.
That's interesting, and it all adds up.
Yeah. Because you're at an age now where you're like, am I doing this for the rest of my life now? Have I got another 15 years of doing this? Do I sell up my business and try something new, or do I try an extreme sport? Or they've started having troubles in their marriage, their children. I've got children that range from 5 to 17.
Wow.
And so you've got kids that are going into secondary school, kids that are going into college. And it's the stresses that you don't have from 10 years before, when you were 35 or when you were 25. Yeah. Everything hits you all at once. And I think along with the testosterone drop, I could be wrong, James.
No, you're clearly not wrong. I mean, you might not apply to all of your mates. Some of them...
No.
So have you thought of recommending the accordion to any of them?
My girlfriend took it up a few years ago.
What?
I bought it for a Christmas present. Yeah, when your last guest was playing, I said to your colleague, I said, oh, she sounds as good as my girlfriend.
We could set up. Where was she ringing from? She was in Sebbar. It's the other end of the country from you. Otherwise, we could have started a support group.
It's really, there's
accordion widowers
and all sorts to play. So, yeah.
Well, I wish you well, I wish her well, and I wish your mates well as well. Because, it's got to be part of it, the chemistry. I don't know if it's likely to be all of them. And also, I have to tell you this, Ben, a couple of people have already texted to say you can actually, I think, do a home testosterone test. It will be posted to you. Superdrug and others will offer that service. Again, I'm very... conscious of anything medical popping up, and none of us been qualified to talk about it. Terry tells me that some testosterone replacement therapies can increase the risk of prostate cancer. So I stress again, do everything through the doctor. You'd be all right doing a test, but don't self-medicate or self-prescribe as a result of that. And a quick shout to Jinxie for the joke of the day, I think. I don't know if he came up with this first, but I shall behave as if he did when he says this debacle unfolding at Centre Parcs, James, has surely got to become known as Parkgate. Parkgate? No? Don't know why I bother. Paul's in York. Last word to you, Paul. I've only got a minute. What's it going to be?
Yeah, thanks, James. First-time caller as well. Fan of the show. I'm offering a sort of slightly different opinion, but from someone younger. I'm 33.
So you're looking up the ladder of life at your older friends, and what have they done?
That's it. I mean, they've had successful careers, either in employment or entrepreneurship, and it's all down. The most successful ones that don't seem to go through this midlife crisis seem to be the ones with a real sense of purpose. Something
so they've still got dreams and they've still got aims and goals and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, but, from a personal point of view, my dad went through quite an extreme midlife crisis, but one that with quite negative impact. He turned to alcoholism, much like, one of your previous callers. And that was at a stage where, I was growing up, I didn't need him as much as when I was a bit younger.
Of course.
The marriage was stagnant, and he didn't quite fit the bill in terms of what his dad thought he would become as well. So there was real parental pressures, because my granddad had a illustrious career as a merchant in the Merchant Navy, and he just never really got to where...
And yet the stuff you loved him for had nothing to do with any of that.
Absolutely, yeah. But it's I think with men generally, and I'm speaking obviously as a man, and I think there's something deeper inside you. It's like this
status anxiety, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
I hope you learn from your dad, mate, and don't set too much store by it as you get older, because it doesn't really deliver in the end, does it? You can have all the status in the world, but if you're not happy in your own skin, then it's not going to make any difference at all.
It's the same with money as well. Money doesn't buy you happiness; it just buys you choices.
That does.
Yeah.
Choices are great. They are great, but of course you might, sounding too glib, that you might make the wrong one. Paul, thank you. I did warn you there wouldn't be much time left, and so I'm sorry that the conversation has to be curtailed a little early. But Sheila Fogarty is here. I will be back tomorrow morning from 10 on LBC, but with the time approaching 1 o'clock, it's time for Sheila. Ching 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 1 o'clock, it's time for Sheila.
Bầu trời chiều không màu nắng ấm, thầm thầm buồn vọng nhớ về đâu. Phương trời xa ai nào hay biết.